כרגע זה פסה, אז אל תנסה להיות כמו כולם היא אחרת. יש פעם אחת, חיים פעם אחת, זה לא חוזר לכבוד, היא פיצחה את הקוד, היא רק רוצה לרקוד, אין מה לעשות איתה, היא רק רוצה לרקוד, איפה לא תיקח אותה, היא רק רוצה לרקוד, מהחוף של מיקונוס עד החוף של מוש. עוצמת העיניים, רוקדת יחפה, רק לרקוד, רק לרקוד, רק לרקוד.
Welcome everyone to this edition of the Articulation, where art is formed in Torah and Torah informs art. This week we have a beautiful, magnificent opportunity to hear from two individuals who experience the beauties of the world in nature and sharing their ideas and thoughts about the Shemitah year, the year when we rest from nature, and their ideas about the culmination of all of it in the year of Jubilee, the Yovel year. We have the fortune here of having present with us Rabbi Aaron Levy, a leader in the revival of downtown Jewish life in Toronto, where he's the founder and spiritual leader of Makom, Creative Downtown Judaism, a diverse and inclusive community fusing Jewish tradition and progressive values through spirituality, learning, and culture since 2009. As a descendant of both Sephardic and Ashkenazi immigrants to Turtle Island or North America, Rabbi Aaron personally embodies Jewish multiculturalism, and he warmly welcomes diverse Jews and non-Jews to explore their own paths in Jewish life and community. Ordained in 2004 in the first graduating class of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, the Open Orthodox Rabbinic School, he is also an avid drummer, cyclist, hiker, and vegan. Yehoshua Hooper grew up being a third culture kid, constantly exploring new places and creating art along the way. He received his MA in Jewish education, nonprofit development, and art education at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City. His artwork and teaching styles are centered utilizing the power of visual language as a means of expressing complex thoughts, feelings, and ideas. Without any further delay, first, Rabbi, could you frame the portion for us?
Hello, good evening. Nice to see folks that I know. Excuse me. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen so that we can look at some sources from this parasha to give us some context for Yosha's art. And most of these sources I'm just going to sort of summarize because there's a lot of them. Okay, so at the beginning of this week's parasha, actually this especially, it's worth definitely reading directly, give us some foundation in the beginning of the parasha. We have Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe, Behar Sinai Lemor. So the Eternal spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai saying, and then it goes on to give the two of the laws of the Shemitah, of the year of release, the sabbatical year, every seventh year, in which the Torah says you should not farm actively, you can't plant, you can't harvest, things like that. And the other main piece of that we get from this week's parasha about the Shemitah year is that whatever does grow, because it's growing wild or because it's a perennial, or because it's the aftergrowth, what has reseeded itself from last year's crop, anything that happens to be growing that's edible is food for all. There's no notion of private ownership of anything that's out growing in the world. Even if it's in your own backyard, so to speak, and you think like, this is my land, well, during Shemitah, it's not your land. It's free for everyone to pick from to eat for that day and that day only, yourself included. So we get two really important laws about Shemitah, the year of release, from the beginning of the parasha. Just to flesh out Shemitah a little bit more, because we also learn about it in a few other places in the Torah. So in Devarim, in the 5th book of the Torah, we have the idea of Shemitah Ksafim, the requirement to release people from debts during the sabbatical year. So all debts are forgiven. And then going back to Shemot, Exodus, 2nd book of the Torah, there's this source that talks about if you have an indentured servant, someone who owes you a major debt, wasn't able to pay it, and therefore has become your indentured servant, like lives with you, and instead of receiving a wage, they do their work to pay off their debt, and you feed and shelter them. So it says in Shemot, the maximum number of years that a person can work in indentured servitude is 6 years. They have to go free in the 7th. Now there's debate. Does this mean they go free at the Shemitah year, like the same cycle that the land is operating on? Or does it mean like, no, it's just like a maximum of 6 years from whenever they started? Okay, so there's arguments on both sides of that, but conceptually, certainly it still links to the idea of Shemitah and the idea of 6 years of work, of sort of normal capitalist enterprise, and the 7th year where there's a total reset of the financial foundations of society. One last piece about Shemitah that I want to point out that we get in Devarim, the 5th book of the Torah. This doesn't relate to really the financial aspects or the agricultural aspects of Shemitah at all, but really has to do with more of a communal component to it. And that is the mitzvah of Hakel, of assembling or gathering all of the Jewish people on Sukkot, right after the Shemitah year has ended, for a public Torah reading. And in fact, this is the only time the Torah itself commands Torah reading. Questions about, does this mean read the whole Torah? Does it mean read the whole book of Devarim, Deuteronomy? Does it mean just read some snippets from it? All sorts of opinions on that, of course. But it definitely is about the idea of reading Torah to the gathered masses of all the Jews, men, women, children, including also non-Jews who are living amongst Jews, so like refugees, immigrants, etc. Okay, so that gives us basically the 5 mitzvot connected to Shemitah. Letting the land lie fallow, whatever happens to grow has to be available to everyone, that debts have to be forgiven, indentured servants set free, and gathering everyone together for a big Torah reading. Okay, so that's Shemitah. Now the piece right at, that was sort of a necessary precursor to understand what's next in the parasha, and this is really where then it connects much more to Yosha's art. The next piece, sort of building off of Shemitah, just as Shemitah is the sort of Shabbat of years, so the Yovel is the Shabbat of Shemitah years. So after having 7 cycles of 7 years, then in the 50th year, it's like a super Shemitah, in which not only do all the other laws that we just went through pertain, but there's an additional thing, which is that all of the land would be, according to the Torah, equally redistributed amongst all the families of Israelites, back based on the original apportionment when the various tribes were given their land allotments at the time of Joshua, so Moses' successor. So that's obviously like a radical innovation in the Torah, and really would prevent wealth from being concentrated amongst a few people, because you can't, especially in an agrarian society, I think that's the next source I have here, yes, the main measure of wealth is how much land you have, right? If you can grow more crops, then you can, you're better off, right? So if some people were not having a great year and had to sell their land, and then they wouldn't have land to farm anymore, they would get poorer and poorer and poorer, right? And that could become an intergenerational cycle. But the Torah is saying, nope, every 50 years, there's a total reset and the land goes back to its original equal distribution. So that's sort of the economic background to Yovel, to this, as it's called, Jubilee year. By the way, Jubilee is just a sort of bastardization of transliteration of the word Yovel, that then went into Latin and then into French and then into English. So Jubilee is just Yovel. If you pronounce the J as a Y, like you do in German and some other languages, and make the B a V, since vet and bet are basically interchangeable in Hebrew, that's how you get from like Yovel to Jobel, Jubilee. Anyway, but the word Yovel itself isn't just sort of a made up word that means this year. Yovel is another word for shofar, in fact. And we know that because in Shemot, in Exodus, there is a place where it talks about blowing the Yovel. So, there it's not talking about blowing a year. It's talking about blowing a shofar. So what's interesting is, and we can look at this here in verse 9, that this one aspect of the 50th year of blowing this shofar, this Yovel, in the 7th month. So we're now in the, after 7 cycles of 7 years, now in the 50th year, and then in the 7th month, or Tishrei, on the 10th of the month. So that gives us the Day of Forgiveness, aka Yom Kippur. You blow a shofar throughout the land, right? Now, normally we think about blowing the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. That's what the Torah tells us to do. Our custom of blowing the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur, it's just a later custom. It's not in the Torah at all. But here we have in the Torah that when it's the Jubilee year, you have to blow the shofar all over the land on Yom Kippur itself. And so it's this idea of blowing the shofar to announce this year that gives the whole year its name. And so I think that raises some questions about like what's so important about blowing the shofar on the Yovel that we name the whole year for shofar. It's really the same thing as if we called the year shofar year. We don't blow the shofar every day in the year, just sort of at the beginning of it to announce it, right? So I thought Rabbi Ovadia Sforno, he was an Italian rabbi living in the, I want to say 14th century, but don't quote me on that. His commentary, I thought, was actually very evocative here. So he says that this shofar truah, this blasting of the shofar, the simchat cherut ha'avadim v'hashavat hasadot l'ba'alehem. So it is an expression of the joy of freedom for servants or serfs and returning of the fields to their owners, meaning to like their original families. So notice he doesn't say it's just about announcing it, right? He says it is an expression of joy. So here, the shofar, I'd say, is almost taking the role of music. It's an expression of feeling, right? And it is also signaling people that, now's the time to go back to your original ancestral zones within the land of Israel. And it's the start of the Jubilee year. But through the commentary of Rabbi Sforno, I think it also kind of plays the role of art, of music, in that it is giving voice to the feeling that the people might have had of maybe relief, of excitement about freedom from servitude and return to their ancestral homes. I'm going to skip a bunch of these sources so hand it over to Yosh now to show his work and talk about it, and maybe I'll bring in some of the sources again later, depending on time. Over to you.
Thank you. First off, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to share this piece, and I had a wonderful learning journey with Rabbi Aaron. We basically, when we got into the text, there's so much that came up for me, and part of my creative process is that when I read the text, I usually get like these flashes or these visions or like these visuals that kind of accompany me on my journey. And when I started to kind of read the Parsha before our meeting, I was going through the text, and it was like a nice little ride, but I wasn't getting that initial flash that usually I receive when I'm getting deep into something. And so thankfully, like after a conversation with the blessed friends, I decided, something, thinking of the time, we're near Lag BaOmer, I feel like I need to look at Behar in the Zohar. And so I pulled out the Zohar and I looked at a particular part of blowing the shofar on the Yoel, on the Jubilee. And there's this concept of what is this release, the setting free. And as I started to read it, all of a sudden I just got into that process where I just saw the image right into my mind, and I just stopped everything and I started to sketch it out and draw. And so I just also kind of wanted to share my own creative process with you with this piece. And so a lot kind of came up from not just the text that we just kind of visited and touched on, but also some passages from this particular section within the Zohar that really focuses on blowing the shofar and the representations to that. And as you can see in the middle of the canvas here, we have the 4-pronged shen. And this is like something that is very symbolic in this idea of a letter that will be revealed to us, something in a sense that we had once, but was also lost. But this letter was not fully lost because it's actually on the headpiece of the tefillin. You have a 3-pronged shen and then a 4-pronged shen. So it's something that is donned for those who wear tefillin every single day between their eyes. And this 4-pronged shen has a lot of lessons, a lot of beautiful lessons to it. Of course, thinking of like Shemitah and the shen being the defined flame, and just kind of really kind of going off the representation of also like the concept of 4 and the gathering from the 4 corners, and also this idea of those who fear Hashem, as they call out. So representing the Kohanim, the Levy, the Israel, and those who fear Hashem, each representing one of those heads. In this piece, there's a lot. So I'm going to take you on a little journey. So bear with me. And we're going to kind of zoom in and zoom out from time to time. So let's just first kind of start at the text at the very top of the piece. This text is something that I saw as a promise. This is like one of the things that really kind of like hit me. This is verse 18 in Behar. And in English, it's like, you shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules so that you may live upon the land in security. And I really thought about that, like this idea of living in security, of just like this deep comfort, being in place. And what does it mean for us to be in a place of security, especially living outside of Eretz Israel for such a very long time. And in a sense, like I know whenever I leave, I feel like a foreigner. And whenever I'm back, I feel like I'm in my place. And there's no form of security that I personally feel when I'm over there. And so I just kind of really kind of focused on this text here as kind of a promise, something to remember, and to like hold close and hold tight. And I think this also goes into a lot of the representation into the text too, of this idea of what does it mean to observe the laws and faithfully keep them and to uphold them. And we learned that the laws of, the laws that we would perform in Eretz Israel, if we can't perform them, we can perform them by studying them. It's the same with the temple laws. When we study them, it's as if we are also performing them. And so I have this representation of the shofar on each corner, and there's these flames that are emitting from them. And there's 11 flames coming out of each shofar. And again, these are representations of something that's in the particular text of the Zohar, but also a representation of us fulfilling mitzvot that are tied to the land. These ones here could be also tied to like the simple type of temple working, but also in representation of, again, only mitzvot that we can only perform when we're in the land and established. And so here they are kind of uniting and being lifted up. And then around the banner, you have 7 predominant flames. So in a way, this is also kind of like a shiviti, which represents this concept and this idea that I have placed Hashem before me always. Just another a reminding for myself. Like when I do my art, I always ask myself, why am I creating this piece? What is my aspirations for it to be a message to those who look upon it? And to remind ourselves, like, who do we stand before? What are we doing with every action, with every breath, with every moment, every thought? What are we doing, and for what sake? So that's just kind of like a very, upfront kind of piece to it. I guess I could read the Zohar text a little bit, or Rabbi, do you want to read the Zohar text? Me?
Sure, happy to. Just give me a sec. I just got to get it back on my screen.
Okay, great. I have it in front of me. I can actually just read it.
Oh,
I was just
okay.
wanted to
Then do it. Yeah, great.
Yeah, no problem. So the text, I'm just going to kind of do a little synopsis of it, but Rabbi Shimon says at the time of redemption, we're called to blow the shofar, right? There's like 12 moments in which we kind of blow the shofar. And some of those have already been spoken about, whether it's on Yom Kippur or Shoshana. We learned that in the times of Yehoshua, he blew the shofar to bring down the walls, and Gidon, King David, when he's bringing in the ark, and King Solomon is crowned, times of danger, the sages appointed like in late Friday nights. I mean, no, not Friday nights, but right before Shabbat, they would blow the shofar. And the other time is right before the coming of the Mashiach, right before there's this idea of blowing the shofar. So he talks about this idea of like redemption. And then at this time, all of Bnei Israel will gather from the four corners. So I really had this emphasis on the four corners right here. And he tells how the Kohanim, Levim, and Bnei Israel will gather together. And in a sense, this represents that three-pronged shen. And that fourth prong also represents those who come into the peoplehood. So that's the other representation to the four. This is like the final gathering of all those who have accepted, which is also, I found to be a very beautiful concept. And at this time, this is when the Bnei Israel will fulfill that which is given to them. And he corresponds that to 51. And so with the 4 11s and the 7, we have the 51, which are like the precepts or the functions in which Bnei Israel will fulfill to bring form this unification or the revelation of what I'm showing as the four-pronged shen. And that's the banner that's being lifted up. And it goes further into it when he talks about like the time of redemption. The shofar will be sounded, and it says, "See he who lifts up the banner on the mountain." So if you look right behind, you'll see the mountain. And of course, you have to have a mountain if you're going to write a piece on Behar. And it says he blows the shofar in here. So it's like this commandment to hear, and this is from Isaiah 18:3. And we learned that in the blowing the shofar is also when the slaves go free. Now, the beautiful thing we know in Hebrew is that we can look at a word and we can also get another meaning from it. So we know that like slave, but we can also say to serve or servant, and we are servants of Hashem. So also those who serve Hashem, in a sense, will be free to fully serve Hashem, because now they're being gathered from the galut, the exile, and being brought to a place where they can finally manifest and establish who they are or their sound. They can actually lift that up. And so that's also a representation of these hands kind of coming out, and then these wings. There's 4 pairs of wings that are kind of lifting up these hands that are holding the shofar, which are blasting. And these wings are in reference to what's found in Shmot. I bore you on eagle wings and brought you to myself, in reference to Mitzrayim. Again, being brought out from a place of galut, of exile, and into a place of where we're meant to be. And then those wings do touch and kind of like frame in the piece. And so that's right there, when I was reading that, that's when I basically saw this image and was able to, thank God, kind of like bring it down and create this piece.
So maybe I'll jump back in and share a couple more sources that relate very specifically to Yosha's work, now that you've gotten a chance to see it and have him kind of walk us all through it. So I'm going to screen share again. Okay. So the first source I want to take a quick look at is from the Kli Yakar. This is a early modern period commentary on the Torah. And what I thought was interesting is that in discussing Hakel, the communal gathering to read the Torah at the end of the Shemitah, the 7th year, it gets to the point of saying, well, what is the Shemitah really all about? And it says it's an antidote to the attitude of sheli sheli, what's mine is mine. And the point of Shemitah is to actually make everyone equal in order to teach us all the concept of peace. And so we have to kind of be hit over the head with that in a very major way every 7 years. So like, hopefully the message will stick with us the other 6 years as well, that really people, no one has any inherent value greater than another person just because you have more wealth or prestige or whatever, right? So seeing Shemitah as being about peace and equality, I thought was almost kind of like a messianic ideal that's embedded within Shemitah. It's kind of like suggested in it. And so with all of the messianic aspects in Yoshua's work, I was kind of reminded of this text. Another source, this relates very specifically to something that Yosh was working off of in terms of like 4 different groups of people. So in Tehillim and Psalms, we have Beit Yisrael Baruchu et Adonai, Beit Aharon Baruchu et Adonai, Beit HaLevi Baruchu et Adonai, Yirei Adonai Baruchu et Adonai. So, O house of Israel, bless the Eternal. O house of Aaron, bless the Eternal. O house of Levy, bless the Eternal. You who revere the Eternal, bless the Eternal. So, we have the idea of 4 here. We have different groups of people, first kind of stratifying into different kind of tribal or sub-tribal groups within the Jewish people, but then really opening it up to everybody, right? Anyone who has awe of God is part of this. It is included in it. So with Yosha's emphasis on the 4 corners and also on the 4-pronged shin, this is a source that he told me that he had kind of in mind when creating the art. Another thing that I want to point out is that, of course, overall Yosha's work it's on black canvas and with white paint, right? And so this was very evocative to me because, it's the opposite of how, art often is done, right? It's like a white canvas and then black or other colors of paint on it. But it reminded me in sort of a reverse way of this midrash here. So with what was the Torah written? Al gabe esh levana be'esh shchora. So black fire on white fire, or literally it says on white fire with black fire, but it makes more sense in English to say black fire on white fire. So I think that's a really powerful idea, the idea of the Torah being written with one color fire on another color fire. But the whole thing is dynamic. It's not just like static ink on parchment, right? Now you could say this is not about Torah scroll, this is about Torah conceptually, but certainly also when you look at a Torah, like the negative space and the positive space can be very striking. And I think that comes out in Yosha's work a lot too. Here, I put a little picture at the bottom. Like the way he uses blacks and whites and negative and positive space, I think is really interesting. And the idea of the 4-pronged shin really contains within it a 3-pronged shin in the negative space, right? But upside down. So like here would be 1 prong, in between these 2 is another, and here's another, right? So they're kind of like enmeshed together. And as Yosh mentioned, right, here you have the mountain. So Har Sinai, like, I said at the very, very beginning, it's Behar Sinai, right? This is being, these laws of Shemitah and Yovel are being given from Mount Sinai. The Midrash says that Mount Sinai was not the biggest, loftiest, most impressive mountain. In fact, it was kind of like a, mountain you might overlook, right? Nothing special. But that really ties in also with the whole theme of Shemitah being given from Mount Sinai. And that Shemitah is really about equality and, not getting distracted by the trappings of grandeur that, we often see around us. And of course, also the motif of 7 that Yosh really employs a number of times in his work. So there's a midrash that all 7s are yakar, are precious, are dear. And if I had to say, is there a magic number in Judaism? It is definitely 7. Starting from the very beginning of the Torah with Bereshit, with the creation story, and running certainly even till the end of Tanakh, the end of the Bible. 7s are really often an organizing principle. They're a literary motif. They come up sometimes very explicitly, other times just more implicitly. If you count up, like, here's an easy example, the number of times the word bara, created, is used within the first chapter of Genesis. It's 7 times. So sevens are really precious and important, and in Judaism, and certainly when we're talking about Shemitah and Yovel, the whole thing is systematized in sevens, and we can see that reflected in Yosha's work too, in terms of the number of flames that we have going on around here. And Yosha, I remember if you said there were some other sevens too that I'm not remembering right now.
No, it's just the main sevens around the banner itself, which also represent, like, the lower sefirot, and we are in the process of the Omer right now. And then kind of going off what you said, like with the light, and that's kind of why I decided to go with this black canvas with white ink, is to really kind of have this essence of light coming out of this place of darkness. And the four-pronged shin also kind of reminds me of another teaching we learned that from the Baal Shem Tov, that there are three manifestations of love in this world. He kind of calls like lights, and each light represents something. And there's kind of like this metaphor to like a burning coal, and the different types of things that you see from it, like the white light, the dark light, and the aura that kind of forms around it. But then there's like this hidden one. But the three ones that we can grasp, that's the three-pronged shin that we use, and those represent a love for Bnei Israel, love for Torah, and a love for Hashem. But then we learned later on from our sages of blessed memory that this fourth one is actually going to become the love for the land of Israel itself. And for the land of Israel, it's actually going to be in the future, it's going to spread to incorporate all the lands of the earth. So again, it's like this idea of like everything coming into a place of unification. And so that's another like additional layer to this piece, and also to the teachings that we have both been sharing.
Yosh, it's such a beautiful piece, and I'm curious about how, like, the idea of the text of bringing all people from all four corners of the earth is like the central concept, and yet there aren't the full-fledged forms of any individual in the piece. And I was curious if there was some intention of avoiding to depict human beings and to kind of have the concept manifest through the symbols that you have.
Yeah, I definitely did not want to draw any human form on this piece. I want it to be something that's relatable to the degree where it's not a particular image of a human. I think it's like, in the sense of hands, we have these hands, if we've been blessed with these hands, and holding up a shofar, again, like, we're not necessarily being carried on these divine wings, but I definitely did not want to put like certain types of concepts that we naturally would probably associate with Behar and Shemitah. I wanted to go like kind of a different route. That's why there's also not like, the 7 species of fruits that would be particularly in the land, the things that we would just kind of allow to grow on its own. There's a lot of those kind of concepts that, like one would probably incorporate into a piece that is dedicated to Shemitah. And here I really wanted to kind of like grasp this notion of what is the shofar? What is this idea of holding it up, and how it's really this ritualistic tool that we use, and we use it to manifest. And it's something that every Jewish home should have, as a shofar, and it's something that we should hold dear to our hearts. Like anytime like I travel, sometimes I travel with my shofar, just because I see it as like this like key piece that I always want to be a part of my Jewish like travel bag. Like that bag that I have ready to pack, like my shofar is like there, ready to go. It's something that I see as like something, I don't know, it's like you just don't you don't leave home without it, in the sense of speaking. That's how kind of I see it. So for, learning about this and this idea of like being commanded to actually blow it at this part, and we know it's a release. And when we blow the shofar, it's like not us blowing, but the inner self of us blowing, the essence of us blowing. So the ruach that gave us life is actually is what is emitting from us to blow the shofar. And that's what's amazing. It's the essence. It's almost like a direct connect to Hashem when we blow that shofar. It's not like this physical body, but there's this inner spiritual essence that is like kind of coming into being And then the shofar is able to bring it out into this world, into this sound. And we know that there's 4 blasts again, like that will blow. And so that's like another kind of a concept. I like to play with like numbers a lot, but that's why I like when I thought about this and I read that piece from the Zohar, I really felt that. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like to be able to blow, to just to be and to breathe. And I think of that all the time. Every time we perform something, we're lifting something into being, and we don't have to come back to correct it. And that's the coolest part about it. It's like once it's there, it's established. The unification is made. It's done. So yeah, there's a little bit of a longer explanation, but that shofar, that's kind of like another part to it.
Ask you a question.
I see a question on the chat. So I did this all by hand. I did it with brush, and I also did it with pen. Yeah, kind of both, a combination.
Yeah, you show amazing skill with the symmetry. It's very exact.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. If we can go to the other screen, we can share probably a bigger, more close, detailed picture of it, so you can see a little bit more of the fine work.
I'm curious about the stars in the background as well. What do they represent, and is there significance of the number of stars that are present?
Yeah, so the stars are radiating. There's kind of like it's like, that's why there's like concentric circles that are kind of emitting from those stars. And so I think of, I utilize that a lot in my artwork. And sometimes each one will kind of have a different representation. It could be, it just really depends on the piece that I'm doing. This one here, it's more in a sense kind of to bring forth like light out of darkness. Yeah, I wouldn't say like necessarily like there's a very strong representation to the number of stars, in the sense of like, of completion, etc. But it's not really my main focus here. This was more of a piece to just to kind of embody the space of the art.
Rabbi, you spoke about kind of Yovel as being this concept of equality and equality of economic resources that individuals have. And there are parallels with Shemitah of some form of like equality or letting go of ownership. But what do you make of the kind of differences between the wholesale equalizing of the Yovel experience, and then also kind of similarities of how those every 7 years parallel to what ends up happening on the 50th?
So I think my understanding of Shemitah and Yovel feels, I guess, maybe textually full, but experientially very thin, because I've never lived in Israel during a Shemitah year, and even living in Israel during a Shemitah year nowadays, it's more observed in the breach, with various legal workarounds in terms of the agricultural laws, and it's certainly not the Torah's vision for what it would look like in antiquity. I mean, all sorts of questions as to whether it's really sustainable in modern times, and just tangentially, there's an interesting approach that rather than seeing Shemitah as a problem to be overcome in Jewish law, instead taking like a permaculture approach and saying that what we think are the problems are actually the solutions. So rather than saying, oh, how do we make Shemitah work with our current economic systems? Well, maybe the approach should be, no, how do we make our economic systems really be influenced by the values of Shemitah? such that observing Shemitah would be feasible without, looking for loopholes, and in a way that would actually influence the quality of economic life in general, not just during the Shemitah year. So in terms of I think, Devere, you're asking about the relationship between Shemitah and Yovel, right? I think of it as it's almost kind of like fractal system, where you have, let's start, I guess, at the smallest level, where you have the week, right? And so you have Shabbat. And then at the month level, you have the 7th month, Tishrei, which is the holiest month. It's the month with the most holidays. You have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret. It's the most days where there's, where you're missing work or school if you're traditionally observant. And so it's the month that definitely represents holiness, and that's the 7th month. Then on the year level, of course, so we have Shemitah as the 7th year. And then Yovel doesn't exactly fit it on a mathematical level because it's not the 49th year, it's the 50th year. So it's like the super Shemitah plus one. But I see it as really, it's all the same system. It's just sort of like more macro, more micro, and it just kind of spirals out. The Torah doesn't talk about after 7 cycles of Yovel or something, like what would happen then. So I don't know how much bigger it could get. But they're definitely interrelated I think in a very robust way, and on a level of like economic policy, which is a lot of how I read this parasha. I think Shemitah is pretty striking, and I think would have been a very severe disruption to business as usual in an agrarian society, and then but you still you're still maintaining an idea of like property rights, basically, even temporarily, not for the year of Shemitah, and then anyone could pick anything that's growing, but like the land itself is still your property if it's your land, right? But then every 50 years comes around Yovel to say, nope, not so much. The Torah, both in this parasha and elsewhere, multiple times says over Kili haaretz, for the earth is mine. Or we see also in Psalms, Ladonai haaretz umlo'ah, the earth is the eternals and everything in it and all its fullness. And so this idea that what we generally perceive to be our own fundamentally is not, it's God's. Or to take a more mystical perspective, more Kabbalistic perspective, it's not that it is God's in the possessive sense, it is God, because ha'eloah kum nitzah, all that exists is God. And so I think the Yovel, comes around every 50 years to really smack us in the head and say it's time to really rethink how we relate to each other, and so that we don't get too comfortable and too accustomed to the way that we always do things in terms of normal capitalist systems. So the Yovel is a significant way of conveying that message, and then the Shemitah is a really significant way of conveying that message, and then come 50 years, the Yovel is an even bigger way of doing it. So I see it really as like it's an amplification of Shemitah.
Wow.
Yeah, Yash, can I ask you, it takes a lot of concentration to make a painting like that, or any good painting. Do you put any like religious ritual? Do you say prayers? It's getting kind of personal if you don't want to talk about it. I'm just kind of wondering, if you incorporate spiritual rituals in your painting, like prayers or whatever.
Yeah, no. Before I start a piece, I always stop and I say, for the sake of heaven. That's something that like pretty much always goes through my mind, whether I'm like writing the notes or doing a little sketch or a draft. I pretty much like in my mind and write something down, which pretty much says, for the sake of heaven, just to remind myself that like, what I have here, has been gifted to me, right? Just like the land of it's a gift, it's like I'd say like my creative expression in art, it's me, it's who I am, but I also know it's a gift. And I have it for a moment in time and space. So I want to remind myself that when I create a piece, like really it's something being channeled through me. And so I stop myself for a moment and I say, for the sake of heaven. I would say that was probably like the most fundamental ritual that I do. When I'm writing text, you read the text, I will think about the letters. I will sometimes just kind of like stop myself and I will go through a particular mental list of the things that I'm thinking about that are related to what I'm doing. So I'm like, every time I'm like doing a dot or a line, I'm infusing it with just the thoughts of the text itself. I try to really practice not allowing my mind to go to other places when I do my art. If I'm doing art for a particular person, I definitely have that person in my mind with every stroke of my pen. Thinking about them, thinking of my conversations, memories, something that they've given me, whatever it may be, if it's for someone, let's say for a particular simcha, then I'm thinking about that simcha and my blessing for them. So with this piece, I was really kind of focusing on this idea of redemption, also this idea of coming into the land and really becoming part of like fulfilled, reaching our potential. So like this piece has like a lot of meaning for myself and my own deep love for Eretz Yisrael. So yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for the answer.
Karen has a question.
I don't think it's a question exactly. I just I feel like in the same way that when you study and when you daven, that you just kind of riff off of internally, the power of what it is that you're seeing. And I think there's a lot of power in this piece, and I'm seeing things that, probably aren't even intentional, but it's a way of sort of divining and communing with it. And so the one thing that is coming up for me, which is probably not even your intention, but again, in that sense that I'm talking a lot about with the parsha about Shemitah and lying fallow in order to rebirth something. And I'm seeing, the har as the mountain as being sort of the place of our birth of our people. But what I'm seeing a lot of is the inversion of that feels very uterine at the top where the text lies. It feels very much like a seat of a uterus. It feels to me very much like a womb, which is in some ways, I've never even thought of it as being sort of the inversion of the mountain, and that somehow that is where we come together. And
yeah, that's what birthed us.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm seeing this as sort of this birthing something, and then just seeing the shin, it never even occurred to me that the 4 and the 3 comes to a 7, and it's the imahot and the avot and the imahot somehow is the combination, which is like, it's totally new and novel and just very exciting in terms of all of the symbolism that you've laid out, which just feels completely inspired. And I'm just enjoying the process of discovery through that. So
thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's like the love of the mother, the teaching of the mother, they say, is what sticks with the child. It's not to say that the teaching of the father doesn't have a foundation, but it's the teaching of the mother that really embodies something that will always be with the child forever. So that 4-pronged shin is of the feminine source. And so that is something that, and again, they're saying, when the energy starts to shift and the energy starts to manifest, we're bringing in more like this divine flame. This divine flame is coming from the feminine, and that will be established alongside with the 3-pronged shin. And this is the note that we're missing. They said the 4-pronged shin, it missing in our world is why our world is incomplete. And so by us performing the mitzvot, by us performing the thing that we're called to do in this life, we're in a sense we're drawing this letter back down to where we will understand its name. And that name is a story. And that story has a sound. And that sound is what's going to radiate and it's going to heal and repair our world. So that piece, like, that's why I really put the shin up front. There's layers here, and I really appreciate your looking at it and expressing your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's something so powerful about like how breath is supposed to come out and how like the wind emerges out of the shofar. But in this, you have fire, and you have something that kind of sucks out the oxygen, and like how Rabbi Levy was talking about the negative space of the black and white. I think it's so beautiful to think about fire as being trailblazing a new path, pushing forward something beyond that didn't exist. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about kind of really going into the metaphor of the fire.
Yeah, so I definitely was able to use the concept of leaven. And we think of where does a leaven fall into our tradition, and it's the ingredients to the incense. And this is something that's very special. And you can't, it's very precise. You can't, add something, you can't take something away. It's like, it has to be very precise. And so I really focused on that idea of what we do. We need to have precision to it, right? We have to do it in such a way that we find a way to perfect it. And a practice is always a practice, no longer how long we do it. It's always going to be a practice. And I think about like that in the forms of our thoughts or speaks and our actions. Like, we have the constant opportunity to perfect it and to make it like, in a sense, like sharp, in a sense where it gives life and it consumes, but it doesn't like destroy. And its ability to produce life is to give, and is to be part of that creative force. I always look at the flame as like this ability to give life and to provide, or if it's done in a different way, it can consume and destroy. And we also have very similar choices. We have the choice to bless and to uplift, or God forbid, that could be inverted to where we destroy and we take away. And so the flames there, like, again, they're lifting up. And so that's like just another kind of representation to that.
I'm going to jump in real quick in terms of the flame imagery that Yosh really layers throughout his work here. It made me think of the phrase that we have in rabbinic texts. It's not in the Torah, but Ishe Yisrael, the fires of Israel, meaning the fire offerings of Israel. Now, traditionally, that's understood to refer to the korbanot, the sacrifices. But I think we can take it not as an idiom that refers to something else, but like literally, what does it mean? The fire of Israel, right? And Israel referring there to the Jewish people. So the idea of like what we're giving that is a flame that is alive and like burning from within us, and then we're putting it out there. So I think, this work and Yosh's other work, are examples of Ishe Yisrael, of the fire offerings of Israel, right? They come from a deep place inside, and that's like burning within him with passion, and that he puts that out into the world, and it's an offering. It's something that he gives to God, as he said, in terms of his intention when he begins to work, and he says, L'shem Shemayim, for the sake of heaven. But it's also it's an offering to others as well, to all of us, to be able to look at it and to enjoy it and to find more meaning in it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Jay, would you like to ask the last question? You're muted. Perfect.
A comment that the four-pronged sheen is the beginning of Shekhinah, which you're talking about, the four representing the feminine So it's also the first letter for the Shekhinah, just mentioning that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. It's so like that both of you have come together in conversation and thinking about the nature aspect of this, the humanless aspect of this, of where we rest and we observe from the place of the Shemitah year. And in observing, we're able to kind of open up and emerge and have a new sense that, like, instead of focusing on the Shemitah aspect of this, it's like the higher goal of the 50 that's been very focused around here, of that it's not just to rest and to make observations and to let the land lay fallow, but in a higher mission, in a higher goal of reunification, of bringing all four corners of the earth, of four corners of our own property into equality, and thinking about where we can access higher forms of equality in our own society is so deep and so poignant, that something that we should all carry. And I hope we all carry it into the smallest form of the sevens this week's Shabbat, that everyone has a beautiful Shabbat. So thank you, both Rabbi Aaron. Thank you, Yosh, for bringing your beautiful light and Torah into the world.
Mamash, thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.